My name is Pauline, and I am 22 years old. I grew up on St. Martin's, a small, quiet island off the coast of England. My father is a fisherman who worked harder than any man I have ever known. He saved every extra penny to send me to school on the mainland because he believed a good education would give me a better life. I have always felt grateful to him, but sometimes gratitude feels heavy when you cannot give back what people expect. After finishing training college, I found a teaching job in Falmouth. I now rent a room from Mrs. Perry, a kind woman who treats me almost like a daughter. My life here looks calm and respectable. I go to school each morning, return in the afternoon, eat dinner quietly, and spend the evenings preparing lessons. Anyone looking at me from the outside would say I live a simple and stable life. But inside, I often feel lost. Teaching has never made me happy. I try my best, yet every day I feel exhausted and unsure of my future. My parents think the solution is marriage, not work. They want me to accept Kevin Winter, a wealthy man much older than I am. I do not love him, but I also do not love the life I have now. That is the truth I admitted only to Mrs. Perry. I feel caught between duty and desire, and I am afraid my next choice may shape my life forever. Life in Falmouth settled into a routine that looked peaceful from the outside but felt heavy to me every single day. Each morning, I walked to the school with my books pressed tightly against my chest, trying to convince myself that I could become a better teacher. But the truth was always the same. I never enjoyed teaching. I disliked the noise, the endless questions, the constant planning. I felt as if I were pretending to be someone stronger, smarter, and more passionate than I truly was. In the evenings, I returned to my small rented room in Mrs. Perry's house. I would sit by the window, correcting papers I didn't care about, listening to the quiet sounds of the house, and wondering if this was all my life would be. Letters came often from home, and every one of them carried the same message: marry Kevin Winter. My parents insisted he was the best chance I had for a stable future. A wealthy neighbor, kind enough, older but dependable. To them, that was all a woman needed. Even Mrs. Perry, who first encouraged me to follow my own heart, slowly began to agree with them. She said my life would be easier if I married him, especially since I clearly disliked my work. I felt pushed from all sides, unsure of what I truly wanted. When I returned home for a short visit, tired and confused, I finally said yes. I chose security because I could not imagine a different path. And then life continued calmly, almost too calmly, as I prepared to leave my job and return to the island for the wedding. When the end of August arrived, I packed my bags and left Falmouth, ready to return home for my wedding. I felt numb more than excited. But when I reached Hastings, I discovered the boat to St. Martin's had left earlier than usual. The next one wouldn't come until Monday. Instead of panic, I felt something like relief. 3 more days before I had to face Kevin, before I had to step fully into the life I had chosen without loving it. I found a small hotel and went for a walk along the streets to clear my thoughts. That was when I heard my name being called sharply behind me. Pauline? I turned, and there stood Edward Stowe, a young man I had known from training college. I had not seen him in years, and the surprise almost made my heart stop. His eyes were bright, but his expression felt troubled, almost angry. He questioned me, why I had quit teaching, whether I was happy. When I admitted I had hated teaching all along, he shook his head and said quietly, I always knew you wouldn't last. You were meant for something different. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Then came the shock I never expected. He told me he had intended to ask me to marry him, 8 months from now, after he settled his work. My breath caught. I whispered that I had liked him too, but I had never been sure he felt the same. I had waited, silently, hopelessly. Our conversation grew heated. He accused me of rushing into marriage with Kevin simply because it was easy. He said he hated a woman in a hurry. I tried to explain the pressure from home, the loneliness, my confusion. Something softened in him then, and he suddenly reached for my arm. You don't have to marry Kevin, he said. Come with me instead. Marry me. Today, tomorrow, before that boat leaves. We can go to Wetwood, get married, and then return together. Let your parents see you already have a husband. Let them see you chose love, not duty. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Edward, warm, young, hopeful, felt like a chance at real happiness, something Kevin had never given me. I hesitated only a moment before whispering yes. By evening, we were traveling by train to Wetwood. On Monday morning, we stood in a quiet church and became husband and wife. No celebration, no family, only a signature and a vow. And now, only days before my island wedding, I already belonged to another man. When Edward and I finished packing our things in Wetwood, we hurried to catch the train back to Hastings. I was terrified, but also strangely hopeful. I imagined telling my parents the truth, facing Kevin with honesty, and beginning a new life beside the man I had chosen with my heart. But the moment we arrived in Hastings, everything began to slip away. We still had 2 hours before the boat left for St. Martin's. Edward, happy and carefree in a way I had never seen before, said he wanted one last swim before we went home. Just a quick one, he told me, smiling. Wait here. I won't be long. I nodded, but inside, dread crawled up my spine. I kept thinking about my parents, their expectations, the carefully prepared wedding waiting for me at home. What would they say when I stepped off the boat with a husband they had never met? What would Kevin do? Would he shout? Would he cry? I stood there lost in anxious thoughts. When I finally looked back toward the sea, my breath froze in my chest. Edward was nowhere. I scanned the water, the beach, the rocks, nothing. Panic spread through me like fire. I ran toward the shoreline, calling his name, asking anyone nearby if they had seen him. 2 men on the beach said they had heard someone had drowned earlier. They described a stranger, a young man who swam out too far. I searched the sand until I found the place where Edward had left his clothes. They were half-soaked, drifting in the water. My legs weakened. In a single moment, everything I had dared to hope for vanished. The last 3 days felt unreal, meeting him, marrying him, planning our future. It all slipped through my fingers like water. I stood silently on the beach, unable to scream, unable to move. Did I really marry him? Was it a dream? Had I lost my husband before I could even tell the world he existed? There was no time to think, no chance to explain. The boat was preparing to leave. In a haze, I walked to the dock, bought my ticket, and stepped aboard as if in a trance. Then I saw him, Kevin Winter. He waved warmly at me. Instinctively, I slid Edward's wedding ring off my finger and hid it in my pocket. When the boat arrived home, my parents welcomed me cheerfully. My mother chatted about the wedding. Kevin spoke to me kindly. I forced smiles, swallowed words, and let every chance to confess slip away. The next morning, I stood at the altar beside Kevin, dressed as a bride, while knowing in my heart I was already a widow. The nightmare wasn't over. For our honeymoon, Kevin took me back to Hastings. Our hotel was nearly empty. The landlady apologized because someone had just died in the best room. That night, I learned the truth. Edward's body lay in the room next to ours. I slept beside my new husband, and beside the man I had secretly married and lost. And in that silence, I felt the full weight of my betrayal, not to Kevin, not even to Edward, but to myself. When we returned to the island, I tried to settle into my new role as Mrs. Winter. Kevin was kind in his quiet way, and the comfort of his large home wrapped itself around me like a warm blanket. Yet every corner of that house reminded me of the secret I carried, the marriage I had hidden, the tragedy I had lived, and the lie I was still living. For a few months, I managed to silence my guilt. I smiled when neighbors visited. I cooked meals. I pretended life was simple again. But then, one afternoon, everything I had buried began to surface. A workman stopped at our garden gate. He looked straight at me and said, "Don't you remember me? I was your witness, in Wetwood." My blood turned cold. He explained that he had been mending the church door when Edward and I were married, and now he needed help to get by. Money, of course. I paid him once. Then he returned with his wife. Then again. By the fourth visit, I slammed the door in his face. I knew then that lies never disappear. They only circle back stronger. That evening, with my hands shaking, I told Kevin everything. My marriage to Edward. His drowning. My silence. My shame. I waited for shouting, for blame, for punishment. Instead, Kevin laughed, a relieved, almost joyful laugh. Then he confessed his own secret. He had been married once too, in Hastings. His wife had left him 5 daughters he had been hiding. He married me hoping I would teach them. In that moment, we saw each other clearly for the first time, not as perfect spouses, but as flawed, frightened humans. We decided to stop hiding. Kevin brought his daughters home. And I, who once hated teaching, began teaching them. It wasn't the life I expected. But it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. As the months passed, I began to understand something I had been running from for so long. The truth never disappears. It waits, quietly, patiently, until the moment it must be faced. I had tried to bury my first marriage, my fear, and my shame, but all I did was give my secret more power over my life. When Kevin and I finally sat together, both trembling with our own confessions, I realized that no marriage can survive in the dark. Secrets rot the foundation long before anyone notices the cracks. And yet, when everything finally surfaced, something unexpected happened. Neither of us walked away. Instead, we chose to stay. We chose to clean up the mess, piece by piece, even if it meant swallowing our pride and accepting painful truths. His daughters came into our home timid and unsure, and at first, I felt as though they were reminders of another deception. But slowly, as I taught them, cooked for them, and listened to them laugh, something softened inside me. I found myself caring deeply, first for them, and then for Kevin in a quieter, more honest way. Now I understand that love is rarely perfect. People make mistakes, sometimes heavy ones. But if there is humility, honesty, and genuine effort, a broken life can still be rebuilt. Our house is no longer a place of secrets. It's a place of forgiveness, responsibility, and the slow, steady work of becoming a real family again. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for learning English through stories with me, and I hope to see you again in the next video.